In the history of the multiverse, few can claim unparalleled power and longevity. The twin Elder Dragon planeswalkers Ugin and Nicol Bolas are among the oldest and most fearsome beings in the Blind Eternities. But there's another who contends for such a position, an individual whose selfish decadence is matched only by the depths of his mystery. He is a stalker, an apex predator and terror of the living, with palest skin and ice-cold veins. But this is wrapped beneath an image of nobility and easy charisma. He is a master of lost arts, a purveyor of exotic artifacts, and a seeker of deep truths. This is the story of Sorin Markov. Sorin Markov is a vampire planeswalker and native to Innistrad, a dark world where horrors lurk to prey on the weak. Vampirism has blessed Sorin with agelessness, and he's one of the oldest beings of the multiverse at over 7,000 years. His power is on par with the likes of Ugin, Bolas, Nahiri, and other ancient planeswalkers. Though the mending greatly weakened Sorin, his innate skills combined with hundreds of lifetimes worth of experience also make Markov one of the strongest beings across the Blind Eternities. Time and power worked to shape him into a discerning, charismatic, and arrogant figure, possessed of deep mystery, shrouded by his noble visage. Sorin has made tentative allies, murdered countless enemies, and pursued his own whims for millennia as he's trekked across much of the multiverse, both known and unknown. Sorin practices an archaic branch of black mana spellcraft called sangromancy, or blood magic. It's considered taboo even among the depraved, an art of which few know, fewer master, but all fear. He uses blood to drain the life force of his foes, as a substance in rituals to place hexes or curses on victims, and with it, he can break mind and will through a form of possession. But this skirts closely to the mesmerizing abilities innate to most vampires, who can enthrall others with a glance. We see the extent of this magic's power in cards like Barter in Blood and Sorin's Thirst. Markov complements his spellcraft with swordplay, and over thousands of years has attained renown that far outstrips even the most dedicated of mortals. In his hands, any blade becomes a most dangerous weapon, but Sorin has cultivated an armory of master-wrought and enchanted swords from across the multiverse. His favorite is the Parasite Blade, a large sword magically enchanted as a dark reflection of its wielder's own bloodlust. It hungers for mana, it leeches life force. Any creature bled by the parasite, no matter the size, is consumed in a matter of seconds and rendered to dust. To maintain his prestige and hint at his underlying martial skill, Sorin often wears gold plate armor adorned with a massive blood ruby. Sorin is by time in nature an epicure. Born into nobility, he has wanted for little and possessed the means to pursue liberal pleasures. He believes himself a charismatic and cultured aristocrat, whose discerning palate has been molded over centuries. As an immortal, Markov battles constantly with boredom or aimlessness. To avoid such a travesty, he travels planes always in search of novelty, always seeking answers, always uncovering dark truths and indulging in both the fine and the exotic. Black mana philosophy instills a sense of ambition and selfishness. Sorin cares little for anything outside his own machinations and will mobilize significant resources to secure personal power. He's not a creature to be crossed and can nurse a grudge for millennia. Though Markov's sangromancy gives him a strong center in black mana, he's also attuned to white. It reflects Sorin's understanding of and need for order, as well as his penchant for civilized restraint. White is also the color of life and vitality. Sorin's mastery allows self-rejuvenation with the essence he harvests from his foes. While they have conflicting philosophies, these two colors mold Sorin Markov into an apex predator able to mitigate any threat or foe through various means. Their opposing moral directives also create a tragic figure, as Sorin often struggles between indulging his own ambitions and sacrificing for the common good. Thousands of years ago, the region of Stensia on the plain of Innistrad was a rugged land shaped by the dominant mountain chain of Gaia Reach. The valleys and plains that stretched in the shadow of these impressive mountains were divided among noble families that oversaw estates manned by disgruntled peasants in an equilibrium of factional disputes. One such family was Markov, who who ruled from an impressive castle, the halls in which young Sorin Markov was born. Little is known of Sorin's parents or his earliest days, but shortly after his birth, terrible famine swept across Stensia and for years crippled harvests, emaciated the population, and cast all into bleakness. The famine was magically sustained by the dark will of a demon lord named Shilgengar. His exact motives are unclear, but it seems he hoped to weaken the will of the human population and manipulate their desperation into his service, which is precisely what happened. An aging alchemist named Edgar, the patriarch of House Markov, obsessed over a path towards immortality. He feared death. He knew his own soon approached, and the Stensia famine, which had already claimed the lives of hundreds, only fanned the flames of desire. While Edgar toiled with beakers and bottles, his family suffered. Not even the aristocracy was immune to the pangs of want and hunger. His sons, daughters, and his cherished grandson Sorin lost faith as food grew increasingly scarce. In the throes of hopelessness, Shilgengar approached the alchemist and whispered honeyed words. He knew of a rite, a profane ritual that would promise the immortality Edgar so desperately desired. At the demon's behest, Markov began blood experimentation and crafted several decoctions. But immortality is a prize that needs great sacrifice, and to fuel a potent spell required the blood of an angel, Shilgengar's ancient enemy. Seduced by the demon's promise, Edgar and his sons trapped and exsanguinated one of Innistrad's angels. From her blood a magical draught was crafted, and Edgar drank. The magic bestowed the agelessness Markov sought, but at the cost of his soul. He was twisted into a ravenous beast, sustained only by the blood of humans. Edgar Markov became Innistrad's first vampire. Thousands of years later, the Lunarch's journal still holds the essence of this tale. It reads, "Countless eons ago, E. Markov brokered the blasphemy that created his foul race of vampires. With the demon Shilgengar, they devised a formula to transform living men into these monsters that fed upon their own brothers and sisters." Invigorated by the spell and now immortal, Edgar broke House Markov free from Stensia's famine. Rather than feed on meager crop, they would instead hunt the peasant population, cull Stensia's humans, and sustain themselves. The House Patriarch immediately blessed his family with this gift of vampirism. Among the first to be converted was his grandson Sorin. The young princeling resisted at first, but was restrained by his elders and forced to undergo the ritual. The speed at which the magic coursed through his body and the haste in which he was transformed unleashed immense trauma within Sorin that fractured his spirit and ignited something latent held deep. The dark ritual not only spurred his conversion to vampirism, but transcended him to the status of planeswalker. Both the front and back sides of Sorin of House Markov brilliantly illustrate this journey. As with all who undergo the ritual, the first moments of vampirism grip the afflicted with insatiable and uncontrollable bloodlust. The neonate likely rampaged through the lands of Stensia, sating himself on all humans unfortunate to cross his path. The curse unlocked great strength, stamina, agility, and even the ability to levitate. Sorin's connection to the blood of an angel and the scheming of a demon bestowed a proficiency in dark sangromancy, and he worked to perfect this magic. Again, it's unclear what befell his parents. Were they consumed by famine? Did they die in vampiric transformation? Or did they simply vanish with time's passing? But as Edgar's most cherished grandson, Sorin soon became heir apparent of House Markov, the most powerful and influential member of the family beneath the patriarch. For a time, Sorin and his family gorged on Stensia's humans, survived the famine, and even brought their gift to other noble houses, thus creating great vampire families. Soon, however, the young Markov realized he would forever live in his grandfather's shadow, so long as he remained on Innistrad. To pursue his own ambitions, to enjoy his newfound power, to explore the realms beyond his own, Sorin Markov left his home plane and began a long sojourn across the multiverse. Markov learned much in his travels about the planes beyond and about himself. He strengthened his will to curb the vampiric bloodlust that roiled within him and vowed to rise above base urges. Sorin pursued dark arts to hone his magical skills and sought the most cunning warriors to learn swordcraft. He sought to cultivate intelligence, patronage, and an appreciation of the finer things, as befitting his noble pedigree. As he traveled, Markov became a being of leisure and pleasure, his increased lifespan giving him ample time to master several areas beyond any mortal. But always, he felt the pull of his home plane. Sorin cherished Innistrad despite its gloom, and would often return to the Markov estate for respite. Here, a fateful encounter with another planeswalker would plant the seed for tragedy and revenge coursing throughout Sorin's story. Nahiri, a core lithomancer native to the plane of Zendikar, arrived on Innistrad shortly after igniting her own spark. In days before the Mending, planeswalkers represented great forces in the multiverse, and many rightly feared others of their kind. Rather than attack or expel Nahiri from his home, Sorin instead took the fledgling walker under his care, as ward to educate and train. This is a large break of character for a self-interested and hedonistic vampire, but something within Nahiri touched Sorin, proving that his curse hadn't utterly destroyed his soul. He mentored her with paternal care, saw her almost as a daughter, and through shared trauma their budding friendship strengthened. Together, they journeyed across many planes, testing each other and sharing adventures. One planeswalk, however, brought them face to face with disaster and showed them the multiverse's limitless potential for destruction. On this unnamed plane, the pair witnessed the arrival of the Eldrazi Titans, inscrutable creatures born of the blind eternities and beyond logic or comprehension. They consume entire planes, feeding off their mana until they're rendered to dust. They appeared a silent, unstoppable force that threatened oblivion for countless planes. Perhaps at Nahiri's request, perhaps stirred to intercede on behalf of his own plane, which he so cherished, the two planeswalkers sought a means to combat the Eldrazi. This brought them into contact with the Elder Dragon and planeswalker Ugin, whose curiosity compelled him to follow the Eldrazi through the multiverse, observe their actions, and document their power. Sorin, Nahiri, and Ugin couldn't, or else feared, to destroy the creatures, so instead devised a plan to trap their physical essence in stasis. This required a mana-rich plane to act as lure for the hungry titans. Nahiri's own Zendikar, suffused with raw and wild ley lines, was offered as bait, much to her dismay. Through a coordinated effort, they would weaken, then bind the Eldrazi in dormant slumber. Sorin's role was to use his sangromancy to distract and drain the life essence of the Eldrazi broods that were unleashed upon Zendikar's surface. Wave after wave of drones were turned to ash as Markov bought time for Nahiri to align the stone hedron network that would draw strength from the plane and act as chains on the Eldrazi, while Ugin prepared a ritual within a mountainous cavern that would be the lock on these chains. The three met within the eye of Ugin, and in the presence of Ugin's ghost fire breath, completed the ritual. The three titans were trapped in stasis, their broods shriveled, and the multiverse was spared from their ceaseless hunger. But the three knew such creatures of raw power might not be contained indefinitely, so swore an oath to preserve the prison and heed the call for aid. Nahiri remained on Zendikar as steward of the Hedron network. Ugin pursued his own plans, and Sorin left to Innistrad. The years spent with Nahiri planted seeds of compassion and altruism within the vampire, and he was much impressed with the young core's growth, but it was time for their paths to diverge. The ordeal on Zendikar instilled a sense of necessary foresight within Sorin, greatly influenced by the teachings and warnings of the spirit dragon, and on his return to Innistrad, Markov had to admit a stark reality. Since Edgar transformed the first vampire centuries ago, successive generations were spawned through infernal blood magic, so that the region of Stensia was completely dominated by their noble houses. Markov was joined by Voldaren, Stromkirk, Falkenrath, and many other lesser families that extended their influence far beyond Stensia. The proliferation of vampires, their superiority, and their lack of restraint bred disaster. As their race ascended, their human prey declined, and if significant measures weren't taken, would be hunted to extinction. Without human blood to sustain them, the vampires would themselves shortly follow and suffer self-inflicted extermination. It's doubtless Sorin was the only one who knew the severity or how parlous was the vampire's future, but he seems the only one who accepted it. Vampires as a race despise their human ancestors and believe themselves superior in all facets. To stoop to such lows as having to admit their dependence on humankind was impermissible. Perhaps Sorin organized a meeting to discuss the fate of the vampires and how the houses might better shepherd their human flock. If such a meeting took place, it's likely Markov would have railed against the excess and debauchery with which the vampires were accustomed and berated them for their lack of self-restraint. But none could be swayed, not even his grandfather Edgar. And while the leaders of each house prevaricated, Sorin took drastic action that would forever isolate him from his kin. Markov realized the humans needed a guardian to survive not just the vampires, but Innistrad's werewolves, geists, demons, and other horrors. They were weak and disjointed. Using the great power available to a pre-mending planeswalker, Sorin created a radiant beacon in the darkness, a stalwart defender of the downtrodden and the preeminent slayer of the vile, in Avacyn, the Angel of Hope. Innistrad supported its own angels, but they were few and couldn't face evils alone. Avacyn became not just the divine protector of humanity, but the sworn guardian of all of Innistrad. Her devotion to the plane likely instilled by her creator's own emotion. Avacyn was a rallying cry for human settlements across Innistrad, and shortly, her hope and faith established a religious order sworn to her veneration, which further strengthened her resolve. The Church of Avacyn preached salvation, trained monster slayers, and advocated for unity. This was only one half of Sorin's plan. The other was the creation of the Hell Vault. Markov had learned the rudiments of lithomancy from his friend Nahiri and used it to build a magically charged artifact that would act as binding prison for all of Innistrad's fell creatures that couldn't be slain. Demons, ghosts, and other powerful entities were sealed within the Hell Vault by the flights of angels and the Church's warriors. With Avacyn's golden splendor ascendant, humankind was spared oblivion, and the vampires were largely curbed in their feeding frenzy. Though some secretly understood Sorin's motives, his actions earned him nothing but contempt and condemnation from the vampire houses. He withdrew to the isolation of his own manors, or else planeswalked to other realms, but styled himself Lord of Innistrad, knowing he had saved his homeland. Many years passed, and Markov pursued his whims, but on Zendikar, the Eldrazi writhed against their prison. Not even the power of the Three could keep them bound indefinitely, and as the seal weakened, a brooding scourge was unleashed upon the plane. Nahiri's intervention prevented the Titans' liberation, but she feared they would make another attempt, and knew she couldn't thwart it alone. As agreed by their oaths, Nahiri sent out impulses across the blind eternities to warn both Ugin and Sorin, and to request their aid once more. For long Nahiri waited, but no answer came. Unknown to her, the spirit dragon had been hunted down and slain by his brother Nicol Bolas in the wildlands of Tarkir. But for Sorin, her mentor and confidant, to turn a deaf ear to her pleas was unlikely. She worried calamity had prevented Markov from arriving, and so left her plane in search of him. Their friendship was ancient now, a faded relic, but Sorin Markov had been her first ally, and Nahiri would know him anywhere. She found Sorin on Innistrad, indifferent to the happenings that unfolded on Zendikar. He claimed the Hell Vault had disrupted the plane's ley lines and prevented her message from reaching him, but he remained aloof. Time cooled their relationship, and angered, the Lithomancer threw out his flimsy excuse and demanded answers. A quarrel soon broke out between the one-time companions. Nahiri felt abandoned and betrayed. Sorin felt unconcerned. Long ago, a foolish girl had called this wretched creature friend. As the last vestige of that youthful sentimentality boiled away, Nahiri struck. Sorin had only recently constructed his Hell Vault, only recently created Avacyn, and both took considerable parts of himself. He was weakened, and his one-time pupil seemed to gain the upper hand. But the Lithomancer's attack and her presence on the plane alerted Avacyn, who deemed the planeswalker a threat and unleashed a flurry of divine strikes against Nahiri. Markov's creation proved strong enough to combat a planeswalker, and as the two exchanged blows, Sorin recomposed himself. With a swipe of his magically charged blade, he flung Nahiri into the Hell Vault, where she would remain a prisoner for centuries. It wasn't the outcome he had hoped for, and his relationship with Nahiri was shattered, but her words remained in Sorin's mind. The Eldrazi have stirred. They threaten the multiverse once more. The vampire soon made preparations to return to Zendikar, investigate Nahiri's claims, and make good on his ancient oath. But other whims and obligations soon took Sorin's attention, and his oath to return to Zendikar would have to wait for 1,000 years. During this time, his pupil remained in the Hell Vault. When he eventually made landfall on Zendikar, chaos immediately met Sorin. To his dismay, Nahiri spoke truth. Eldrazi broods multiplied in a consuming sweep of Zendikar, and the three titans stirred from their slumber. The machinations of Elder Dragon Nicol Bolas led to three planeswalkers, Sarkhan Vol, Jace Beleren, and Chandra Nalaar, meeting at the Eye of Ugin and inadvertently unsealing the binds to their prison. The nations and continents were in an existential battle against relentless, hungry hordes. With Nahiri trapped in the Hell Vault and Ugin's whereabouts unknown, Markov was the last of the three walkers who had originally imprisoned the Eldrazi. He sought to learn the truth of Zendikar's predicament, and if he could, neutralize their emergence. Sorin quickly allied himself with the elf and Zendikari native Nissa Ravain, and after easily dispatching an Eldrazi brood, liberated the vampire Anawan, who had been enthralled by the monsters. Nissa's elemental skills and Anawan's extensive knowledge were necessary for Sorin to reach the Eye of Ugin, and he urged them to bring him to the chamber. The trio's journey took them across several of Zendikar's continents, including Ondu, Balaged, and Akum, and demonstrated to his companions the extent of Sorin's cruelty, the depths of his dark knowledge. Known as the Mortifier among the plains vampire tribes, Sorin used his sangromancy to render Eldrazi to dust, to kill goblins with a wave of his hand, and to unleash destruction upon vampires he deemed bestial and uncultured, a sentiment heard in the flavor text of Feast of Blood. The vampires of this world don't know the pleasures of hunger. They gorge themselves without savoring the kill. The horror of Sorin's character deeply concerned Nissa, and she began to doubt who exactly she had agreed to aid. As the companions came to the shores of Akum, they were waylaid by the massive sentient kraken, Brynelin, who recalled Sorin from his last visit millennia prior. Sorin's attempted browbeat failed, and only Ravain's quick diplomacy moved the kraken, who eventually let them pass. After many trials, they finally reached the chamber of Ugin, high within the mountains. But Nissa, who had seen such destruction wrought on her home plane by the Eldrazi, and had witnessed Markov's cold malice, had a change of heart. Rather than assist Sorin in strengthening the seal on the main Hedron, Nissa destroyed it, hoping that freedom would send the Eldrazi across the multiverse and spare Zendikar. With the last chain shattered, the three titans emerged, wreathed in their full power. Markov berated Nissa for her stupidity, that she failed to comprehend the destructive nature of the Eldrazi, and considered his oath fulfilled. He left Zendikar to its fate, and raced back to his home plane to strengthen it against a potential Eldrazi incursion. Dark mysteries greeted Sorin on Innistrad. The brilliant light of Avacyn had disappeared, and the power of her church waned. The humans were beset by ravenous terrors, infiltrated by demonic cults, and once again hunted with impunity by the vampire families. The order Markov created crumbled without the Archangel's aura, and his need to find Avacyn was now twofold. She was the key to Innistrad's defense against the Eldrazi, and also a check to prevent self-destruction. The vampire journeyed across many regions to find human settlements razed, human populations diminished, and the increasing debauchery of his own people. We hear Sorin's disdain in the flavor text of Bloodflow Connoisseur. Death not for survival, but for vanity and pleasure, this is the decadence I sought to curb. The quest for Avacyn was delayed by the arrival of Tybalt, an anarchist and devilish planeswalker also native to Innistrad, motivated by pain and twisted enjoyment to destabilize planar order, undermine authority, and sow chaos. Tybalt's presence on Markov's beloved plane only hastened Innistrad's decline. The young upstart represented a threat that couldn't be ignored. While Sorin battled Tybalt, the necromancer Liliana Vess arrived on Innistrad in search of the archdemon Griselbrand, one of several infernal overlords who owned a fraction of her soul. Vess learned that her demon had been imprisoned within the Hellvault by Avacyn, but not before dragging the angel into the artifact alongside him. The necromancer needed to release Griselbrand so she could slay him. The people of Innistrad needed to release Avacyn to survive the ascended darkness. Liliana therefore manipulated Thalia, the Cathar and guardian of the Hellvault, into destroying it. The energy from the blast sent silver shards flying in all directions. Avacyn streaked like a brilliant beam into the sky and was restored to her position. But Griselbrand and hundreds more of Innistrad's most foul creatures were liberated from their prison. Far more terrible and portentous, however, was the freedom granted to Nahiri, Sorin's old pupil. 1,000 years of confinement had sharpened the core's anger, had strengthened her contempt for Sorin and her remorse at being betrayed. This was furthered when she returned to Zendikar to see her plane ravaged by the Eldrazi, dying from Markov's insolence. Nahiri vowed to unleash unimaginable destruction. As Zendikar has bled, so will Innistrad. As I have wept, so will Sorin. This I swear, on the ashes of my world. Sorin remained oblivious to all of this, for after seeing his creation once more grace the skies of Innistrad, the vampire felt his plane safe enough at present for him to pursue the Eldrazi mystery and seek out Ugin's fate. This brought Markov to the plane of Tarkir, a land of dragons and seat of Ugin's power. An aura of foreboding suffused this plane. The dragons had long died out, along with their mystical dragon storms. The land was bereft of the spirit dragon's presence. Something grave had befallen Markov's companion, and the vampire trekked through Tarkir's frozen frontiers to uncover the truth. An enthralled Temur warrior guided Sorin to the silent and solemn tomb of the spirit dragon, a great fissure that held Ugin's ossified remains. Centuries prior, Ugin had been pursued and bested by his brother Nicol Bolas. Sorin could no longer rely on the great dragon's aid in confronting the Eldrazi. We see this tragic moment illustrated in bitter revelation, the flavor text of which reads, "Here you lie then, Ugin. The corpses of worlds will join you in the tomb." But external events would have profound impacts on the timeline. Ugin and Tarkir's fate would be reforged by the intervention of Sarkhan Vol, a planeswalker who traveled back in time to the moment of the Elder Dragon confrontation and spared Ugin from death at Bolas's hands. In this alternate timeline, Ugin was gravely wounded but convalescing inside the stasis of a Hedron cocoon. Rather than find his remains, Sorin stumbled upon the healing spirit dragon and awoke him from slumber. He related the events on Zendikar, told of the Eldrazi's unsealing, but made no mention of his falling out with Nahiri. Ugin demanded Markov find his pupil and meet the dragon on Zendikar in haste, lest more planes fall to consumption. Again, Sorin found himself involved in affairs far beyond his own, wasting time and energy on actions that didn't directly impact him. An internal struggle raged between selfless altruism and selfish necessity. Eventually, he decided he would return to Innistrad to free Nahiri from the Hellvault and confront his one-time friend. He couldn't have prepared for what was about to meet him. Avacyn's return didn't stabilize Innistrad. Her flight of angels and the church became intolerant and paranoid. They launched increasingly brutal inquisitions to root out corruption. Their zeal blinded them to innocence. Word spread throughout the provinces that bizarre creatures twisted into alien forms lurked in haunted thickets and abandoned moors. It seemed an eldritch corruption was eating minds and breaking bodies, and all across Innistrad, mysterious cryptoliths appeared, the purpose of which none could speculate. Sorin sought to gather his bearings in his ancestral home of Markov Manor, but found the estate shattered to its foundations, its edifice eerily suspended in space, and its inhabitants cruelly murdered, encased alive within stonework. We see this horror in the illustration of foreboding ruins and merciless resolve. Only one being in the multiverse had such mastery over the earth, backed by a hatred for the vampire, as the flavor text of Declaration in Stone reads. The message was clear to Sorin. Nahiri had paid Markov Manor a visit. The Lithomancer had escaped her Hellvault prison and was bent on destroying all Sorin held dear. The massacre at Markov Manor left few in his bloodline remaining, which forced Sorin to reach out to Innistrad's other prominent families for aid, but his previous actions in creating Avacyn alienated the planeswalker from many other vampires. Only Olivia, the reclusive matriarch of House Voldaren, agreed to lend her forces to Markov's campaign of vengeance, but with one stipulation. Sorin must first destroy the Archangel. The fact that Markov accepted these terms speaks to both his desperation and his anger. Avacyn held a piece of his own essence within her. She was his daughter, his exquisite masterpiece, but Nahiri's injustice unsettled the normally composed vampire and stirred such venomous bloodlust that he was prepared to pay any cost. Sorin confronted the Angel in Thraben Cathedral just in time to spare planeswalkers Jace Beleren and Tamio the Moonsage from her wrath. The two had been drawn to Innistrad's cryptolith mystery and tried to puzzle together the clues to the plane's madness. Not even Avacyn was immune to this corruption, and Markov realized the deplorable state that overcame her and her flight of angels. Her mind had been twisted by an unknown force, her benevolence molded into brutality, her protection molded into persecution. It was clear to Sorin that Avacyn had fallen from her divine height, but he was still loath to destroy his creation. Instead, he tried to reason with her, promising that he could cure her mind of its affliction. Fighting broke out between father and daughter, but Avacyn was no match for the vampire's sangromancy. In the cathedral cellars, Markov begged the angel to accept his help, but in a moment of lucidity, Avacyn hurled blame and insult. As her creator, he was to blame for her madness. He was the one who made her vulnerable and less than perfect, and it was his hands stained by all the blood she had let. With no avenue of recourse, Sorin slowly rendered his brilliant child to dust. This moment is illustrated in anguished unmaking, the flavor text of which reads, Sorin had created Avacyn, so it was a cruelty beyond imagining, a pain beyond description, that it fell upon him to end her forever. With Avacyn destroyed, Innistrad's final barrier of protection failed, and to Sorin's regret, the depths of Nahiri's revenge made clear. The madness, the strange creatures, the cryptoliths, all pointed to one thing. In the Drownyard of Nephalia, Nahiri beckoned forth the Eldrazi titan Emrakul from beyond the blind eternities to lay waste to Sorin's home, to break the vampire's heart completely. This pushed Markov beyond the boundary of reason. He didn't aid the Gatewatch against the Eldrazi, nor spare the inhabitants from Emrakul's influence. He instead executed a bloody war against Nahiri. They met in the ruins of Markov Manor and traded devastating blows. Master turned on pupil, and the thread of their past friendship was severed. Mentally and physically drained from his confrontation with Avacyn left Sorin weak, and he was bested by the Lithomancer. Nahiri encased him in a stone prison, locking him in painful immobilization and rendering him helpless to prevent the plane's destruction. The core had her revenge. Just as she watched Zendikar burn, so too would he witness Emrakul consume Innistrad. After Nahiri planeswalked away, Olivia Voldaren discovered Sorin, but rather than assist him, she instead took his sword and his title. She would be the new Lord of Innistrad. She left him to rot in anguish. Only through steely determination did Sorin carve himself from Nahiri's prison. Shortly after, he was drawn, like hundreds of other planeswalkers, to the plane of Ravnica by the interplanar beacon during the War of the Spark, instigated by the elder dragon Nicol Bolas. The Lithomancer too had been called to and trapped on Ravnica, and the pair resumed their terrible vendetta. They were blind to Ravnica's destruction, the Dread Horde's mobilization, and Bolas's ascendancy. Blood feud narrowed their tunnel vision, and the two fought against one another across the city. This we see in cards like Sorin's Thirst and Single Combat. The flavor text reads, "Not even a threat to the entire multiverse could persuade them to put aside their feud." Surprisingly, however, they were able to cast aside their grudge and reach a temporary truce to assist the planeswalkers against Nicol Bolas. As two old walkers, they were instrumental in opposing the Dread Horde invasion and weakening the Elder Dragon's power. Even more surprising is the fact that both Sorin and Nahiri remained to fight, even after the destruction of the Immortal Sun, which had prevented their planeswalking away. This highlights a potential shift in Markov's character. He had now been witness or complicit to the destruction of Innistrad and Zendikar. He had seen the atrocity of interplanar threats. Perhaps he found determination and purpose in preventing other worlds from falling to the same fate as those. Whatever his motive, Sorin saw through the war's end and Ravnica's triumph. Following the tumult of recent events, Sorin returned to the ruins of House Markov to wallow in isolated introspection. The fall of his house, the damage to his plane, the destruction of Avacyn, all swam through his thoughts, and guilt consumed Sorin. He grew jaded. Despite his efforts and interventions, the planes he visited came to ruin. Perhaps it was best to take up the hedonism of his youth, or else retreat from the multiverse entirely. His lamentations were disrupted by the arrival of a group including Teferi, Arlen Cord, Kaya Kassir, and Chandra Nalar, who saw danger in the rise of werewolves and vampires. These creatures of darkness wished to bring eternal night to Innistrad, which would doom humanity and the remaining angels to extinction. To prevent the eternal night, the group of Gatewatch sought the Moonsilver Key, a sacred vessel integral in the Harvesttide festival surrounding the artifact known as the Celestus. The key had found its way many years ago into Sorin's care, but the weary vampire refused their request. If his family and his race wished to gorge themselves and devolve into unrestrained bloodsuckers until they died, so be it. He was done intervening. The group's pleas enraged Markov, and he lashed out at them, but they were spared by the divine intervention of Sigarda. She challenged Sorin and condemned him for his torpor. While the two engaged one another, the group of walkers stole into the manor and gathered the Moonsilver Key. Before the heroes and witches of the Dawnheart Coven could complete the Harvesttide ritual, Olivia Voldaren descended and after a bloody attack at the Celestus, took the Moonsilver artifact. Eternal night descended upon Innistrad, and the moon was transfixed in place, suffusing the plane in a ghastly magical aura. Voldaren, the self-proclaimed Lord of Innistrad, wished to secure her primacy, and so sought a blood union with the patriarch of all vampires, Edgar Markov. Using his blood, the magic of the Moonsilver Key, and her own great powers, Olivia intended a ritual to control Innistrad's angelic host and neutralize the last threat to her position. Again, the planeswalkers came to Sorin and begged for his intervention. Hearing that his grandfather was victim to Olivia's manipulation stirred Markov from his lethargy, and he agreed to infiltrate and disrupt the Crimson Wedding that would bind Edgar to Voldaren. Upon arriving at the Voldaren estate, Sorin found Sigarda hopelessly bound, the vampires celebrating their triumph in festivities, and Olivia's attendants dragging in Edgar Markov's coffin. The planeswalker attempted to disrupt Olivia but was restrained, and using her own blood, she awoke the ancient patriarch from his centuries-long slumber and enthralled Edgar to her will. But as the couple exchanged profane vows, Markov again struck, this time aided by the release of Sigarda and the arrival of the Gatewatch heroes. The angel unleashed a divine fury that turned the wedding into a chaotic bloodbath. Sorin chased down his grandfather and confronted Edgar. The two exchanged blows and harsh words. Edgar berated his grandson for the wasted potential he represented, the failure that he was. For his part, Sorin condemned his grandfather's recklessness and cold ambition. Dazed and emotional, Sorin was overpowered by Edgar and left wounded. The planeswalker descended into the depths of his own spirit, confronted his past and the hundreds of decisions, mistakes, and heartless acts perpetrated. Finally, something inside shifted. An authority, a responsibility, and a strength asserted itself that had disappeared since Avacyn's fall. Sorin realized that despite his mistakes, he was still capable of good, and that even a heart as dark as his wasn't beyond redemption. Sorin returned to the fighting that consumed the main ballroom, and once more lashed out at his grandfather. This time, he bested Edgar, but displayed clemency, commanding his grandfather to flee rather than taking his life. Sorin assisted the Gatewatch in reversing Eternal Night, and once more brought stability to his home plane. In the aftermath, Markov admitted that he shared a common bond with the Planeswalkers, that he wasn't alone in the multiverse, and that he could accomplish more with others than he could ever hope to by himself. It seems in his many trials, change was overcoming Sorin's character. As Innistrad's defender once more, Sorin worked alongside Arlen Cord to prepare the plane against the next great threat, the multiversal invasion from New Phyrexia and Elish Norn's March of the Machine. He organized and united the plane, informed its populations of the nature of New Phyrexia, and fought valiantly for his homeland. Without Avacyn as protector, Sorin Markov invested himself as its greatest advocate. It's uncertain what fate has in store for the vampire moving forward, and it's unclear whether Sorin has retained his Planeswalker spark following the Great Spark rupture. Nahiri, his greatest adversary, has herself been desparked and is concerned primarily with Zendikar's recovery. Has time and circumstance healed the rift between them, or do both retain a seething animosity that will only end when one no longer breathes? Sorin Markov, an ancient being who wields great power, has traveled the multiverse to learn, to train, and to follow dark desires. He's a complex character that at times shows ruthless self-interest, uncaring hedonism, but with the capacity to do great acts of good for the well-being of the masses. It's clear that he loves Innistrad. He cares for the continuation of his species, and he will go to great lengths to defend his home. Only time will reveal what awaits for Sorin Markov's future, but it's one of shadows pierced by guiding light. Thanks so much for watching and listening to this video on the story of Sorin Markov. Let me know your thoughts about the vampire's grudge with Nahiri, his actions around the Eldrazi, as well as your own insights and suggestions for future videos in the comments below. And if you're a fan of lore and storytelling, be sure to subscribe to the channel, check out the podcast where content is uploaded frequently. I want to take a moment to thank my amazing supporters over on Patreon who make all of this possible, and I couldn't do it without their fantastic support. If you'd like to become a lore luminary for access to me, a great community, written scripts, and early video drops, head to patreon.com/thelorebrarians to learn more. Until next time, go forth and explore the lore.